Is still clashing tonight in Tahrir Square, pro and anti-Mubarak, and summing up, it doesn't take long to look at the situation and realise this is the result of a lack of control and a lack of leadership. Now, there is the army and the part it has to play. People are fearful the army might suddenly decide to take sides. Many people have said to us today that they wish that President Mubarak had appointed someone to take over in his place for the next 8 months before elections in September, perhaps as vice president, just to give people the idea that there was someone else running the show for the time being. There are opposition candidates, they're few and far between, they haven't enjoyed much daylight under Hosni Mubarak. One of those men, Mohammed al-Baradei, the former weapons inspector, he's got contacts around the world, as everyone knows, but also, as an Egyptian, he's expressing an interest in perhaps having a political future here. This is what he had to say earlier on.
I think it's a last-ditch effort to stay in power, despite the writing on the wall, despite every Egyptian made it loud and clear that he needs to go, that he lost the credibility, he lost confidence, he lost legitimacy. The country is in a state of siege, as you can see. Everything is came completely, grounded to a halt. I don't really understand, and he is offering too little, too late. Nobody believed that a dictator, after 30 years, in the last 6 months of his term, going to introduce democratic reform. I mean, it's an oxymoron.
Mohammed al-Baradei there, possibly a contender for some sort of political role later on in Egypt's future. Former director of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, a man well used to dealing with international politics, but not so used perhaps to dealing with the politics of home. Two things people have identified to me on the street as being an issue, most of them with anger. One is Egypt's peace agreement with Israel. People find that frustrating, that that seems to be going nowhere, and yet they're sacrificing a lot of credibility as an Arab nation. And also Egypt's relationship with the United States, that the United States is seen by many as a puppet master, as someone who calls the shots and Hosni Mubarak responds. Well, those are accusations that have been lobbied around tonight. There's also a point of view coming out of the White House fairly consistently and fast. Let's go to Washington now, speak to our Washington correspondent, Robert Nesbitt. Robert, bring us up to speed with the flavour of how America is looking at the events today.
Well, there was a statement released by Robert Gibbs, the White House spokesman, about an hour or so ago, saying the United States deplores and condemns the violence that is taking place in Egypt, and we are deeply concerned about attacks on the media and peaceful demonstrators. We repeat our strong call for restraint. We will hear more, I'm sure, from Mr. Gibbs in about half an hour when there is a full White House daily briefing. But if I can pull together just a few strands from the administration, what we're hearing from certain key players in the administration this morning. William Daley, the new chief of staff in the White House, was on MSNBC, a news network here, and he said that the White House had been taken by surprise at events in Cairo, especially after President Barack Obama's, quote, cordial telephone call with Mubarak yesterday afternoon. We have also heard that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mike Mullen, has spoken to his Egyptian counterpart this morning, and he reiterated America's desire to see the situation return to calm, and he expressed his full confidence that the Egyptian army would be able to protect the Suez Canal. So you sense something of a diplomatic scramble here, Andrew, the American president and the administration trying to keep up to date with the events that are happening so quickly on the ground there, meanwhile trying to perform this quite difficult diplomatic ballet of influencing events without putting their fingerprints on whatever the outcome may be.
Robert, thanks very much indeed. You know, an interesting comment made to me today by one fairly established Egyptian businessman here. He said, you know, under George W. Bush, although he was going in the wrong direction, at least he was going in a direction, and we understood what was coming out of the States. But many people here are critical of the Obama administration, saying that it's really not doing anything, and it's allowed matters in the Middle East to drift. And they say we're seeing the results here on the streets of Cairo as being part of that drift. Let's just get a final thought from our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, who was in those demonstrations in Tahrir Square earlier on and now standing at a safer vantage point looking on. Stuart, tell us how things are going now in Tahrir Square. Is the momentum still there?
Yes, But we're just on the outside of the square, Andrew. There's been a standoff with people trying to get the two sides to calm down. That appears to be breaking down, and the stone throwing has just started. I'm not sure if you can make it out in the darkness, but there's youths running in from the bridge side towards the square, throwing stones. We've had a couple of Molotov cocktails in the last half an hour or so, a lot more prior to that. And others now appear to be coming through the barricades that they've erected in front of a line of tanks, and they too are throwing stones, with the youths then going off in either direction. There's a sort of running to and fro battle taking place. Not huge numbers here, but it's been pretty violent. I get the impression that it's the pro-Mubarak supporters who've withdrawn a little and are now throwing stones towards the barricades. Now they're rushing out. I think we should be able to make this. They're rushing forward from those barricades that they put in and are throwing stones and trying to chase these youths down and across the bridge. You should be able to see that past the ambulances. They've basically come out of the square and are forcing them back. Now this has happened on a number of occasions. They then regroup at the other end of the bridge and make their way back down, and it all starts over again. This has gone on now for the last hour or so.
Well, there you go. Stuart, thanks very much indeed. Stuart Ramsey there live just above Tahrir Square. Well, there you have it, the scene from Cairo. An evening and a day in Cairo that's left all the people here stunned and fearful for their future, both observers and people living here and calling Egypt their home. And it's the result of a president who was called on to resign, who decided that he would go, but he wouldn't go. It's got a military that say they're in charge, but they're not taking sides, leaving a population confused and angry. And this, I suspect, we show you from Cairo tonight, is the result. For more analysis, let's go back to London now with Jeremy in the studio.
Thanks, Andrew. Interesting, just to put this into some proportion today, the violence. The Health Ministry spokesman in Cairo said in the last few minutes that they, at the moment, believe that 350 people have been injured up to now, and that what they describe as security-related man has been killed in those clashes, and that may still be a conservative estimate of the damage that has been done on humanity in the heart of Egypt's capital. Well, let's bring in Dr. Wafik Moustafa, who's now chairman of the Conservative Arab Network, joins me in the studio, and an expert on Egyptian affairs. You know Cairo very well. I bet you can barely believe your eyes what you've seen in the heart of your capital city today.
It's certainly un-Egyptian behavior. Particularly today is a really sad day for Egypt, particularly when you get a rent mob going around, coming to Tahrir Square, young men who could say they're certainly very coordinated together and trying to exhaust and really trap the uprising in Egypt, which is, it really says a lot about the sincerity of Mubarak and the regime as a whole. And I think there must be some form of measures, because obviously they don't want to lose what they've got. These people don't just want power. They have got a lot of assets inside and outside Egypt, and they're desperate to keep themselves in control.
Come back to you, Dr. Wafik, in a minute for more analysis on Egypt. Let's go to Washington live now. And I'm joined by Aaron David Miller. He's a fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center and advised 6 former US Secretaries of State. Very good evening to you. What would you be advising the current Secretary of State and the President on this one? It's a pretty tricky one for the United States to know just how to handle this crisis.
I think it is, and the administration is trying to juggle 3 balls and keep them all up in the air at the same time. The first is to identify themselves with the values and the interests of the demonstrators. I mean, how can America, which has allied itself with authoritarian regimes from one end of the Middle East to the other, not encourage this kind of change as long, of course, as it's peaceful? Number 2 is not to be the center of the story. I mean, with all due respect to some of the commentary, we are not in control of this. We cannot micromanage the domestic politics of the Egyptian Arab Republic. And 3 is to encourage the president to understand the importance of making this transition. And the our president has brought him part of the way. The problem now, of course, is that the longer this goes on, the longer you see masses of people in the streets, frustrated, angry, resentful, the greater the chances of violence. And we saw the first manifestations of it this morning. Violence between opposition groups. I'm sure some of the pro-Mubarak supporters are encouraged by the government. I think Mubarak's speech last night was designed in part to divide the opposition, and I think it succeeded. But you can also see, in an effort to maintain order and prevent lawlessness, the military at some point having to step in, and that could create a massive confrontation. So we in this case, the United States, we really do lack good options. The only force that is capable of persuading President Mubarak to stand down and to come further toward the needs and the requirements of the protesters, if he's at all inclined to do so, are his own military comrades. And I'm not sure at this point that's going to happen.
One of the difficulties is the sort of balancing act that America has to try and perform in everybody recognizes that for 30 years or more, this the American government of various different shades and opinions has supported President Mubarak. Now you say that they want to be seen to be supporting the popular opinion in the country, the people power movement, and maybe across the region as well. The sincerity of that obviously beggars belief in some quarters of the Arab world.
Well, forgive me, great powers, including Britain when it had its imperial moment, are great in part because they are forced to reconcile certain contradictions, and in fact they behave hypocritically. The reality is we want to find a way, we in the United States, the administration wants to find a way to create a transition, to identify with the powerful forces of political change, good governance, accountability, inclusiveness, free speech, respect for human rights, but at the same time to throw an ally. This is not Saddam Hussein. This is not Slobodan Milosevic. This man has served his country, maybe not from the perspective of those on the streets right now, for many years very honorably, and he has been a partner for the United States. So to throw him under the bus is frankly not a good situation for the United States to be in. We need to maintain influence during this period. We need to maintain influence with Mubarak's colleagues who will stay behind once he departs. And we also don't want to send the signal that the United States has the capacity to somehow direct or micromanage change from Washington, because we don't.
I'll just, whilst you're there, Mr. Cooper, just read out this brief statement from Philip Crowley, who's Assistant Secretary of State at the State Department, who said that after days of peaceful protests in Cairo and other cities in Egypt, today we see violent attacks on peaceful demonstrators and journalists. The US denounces these attacks and calls on all engaged in demonstrations currently taking place in Egypt to do so peacefully. These attacks not only dangerous to Egypt, they're a direct threat to the aspirations of the Egyptian people. The use of violence to intimidate the Egyptian people must stop. We strongly call for restraint. But apart from that, what else can the United States do apart from, call on the better nature of the Egyptian people at the moment?
I agree with you. I think our options are not only limited. At this point, having interceded by sending a seasoned American diplomat and a personal friend of President Mubarak, Frank Wisner, to Cairo, to encourage the president to create this transition, not to run again in September, and to create a transition, perhaps even an authority to govern in his stead until presidential elections. Having issued the statement last night urging that transition begin now, I'm not sure there's much the United States can do. We are not the puppet master. We do not orchestrate and control events on the ground. If only we were capable of some of the things that people accuse us of, we'd be a greater power than we already are.
Talking of events on the ground, Mr. Miller, thank you very much. I'm going to take us straight back to Stuart Ramsey, our chief correspondent on the ground in Cairo, with the latest. Stuart?
Jeremy, you can see now there's fighting on the bridge. The protesters, we believe, are pro-Mubarak protesters, have been pushed back and the anti-Mubarak demonstrators appear, this is who we think it is, have come and to the front of the bridge. There's been Molotov cocktails thrown, though they haven't gone very far. In fact, a couple of them seem to have exploded in the hands of the people who had them. But they're throwing stones. The people are putting up these, they've been tearing off these hoardings in the building site in the square and brought them out and are using them as barricades. There's a car that's been there for a few days. We've seen it. That's now become a barricade as well. It's been going back and forth like this for the last hour or so. But this is the first time that the fighting has actually taken place on the bridge proper. They seem to be trying to push them back. Someone seems to be moving that car now. Yep, he's probably decided enough of that. The rocks are coming in, and as I said, there were some Molotov cocktails. We saw a lot more earlier, Jeremy, particularly when it was nearer to the square. But I think the significance of this picture is that this is now outside the square. It's extending. We're watching now that barricades to the right of the picture where we were now being brought forward, and they're building yet another barricade, this time at the gateway to the bridge, if you like. Now, there's quite likely to be a charge back at some point once they get themselves organised, either bringing up Molotov cocktails themselves or getting more sticks and stones rather to throw back at the protesters who have been taunting them and then made a charge. So it's the type of thing we've been watching for a long time. This is the first time. I think there's another charge going on now. Here we go. And they're trying to push them, obviously trying to take them on the bridge. Not huge numbers here, Jeremy. These have been going on for a while, Jeremy, as I say. This is the first time, however, that they've actually advanced up the bridge that far to try and push their opponents off it. What is interesting is that behind them there are more people that we can see in the shadows, so who I suspect are not part of this demonstrator group. Others, of course, just seem to be bystanders who are watching on. But I think we're going to see this all night, Jeremy. It's violence all over the square around in the centre of Cairo.
Thanks, Stuart. Let's just try and give you an idea of the geography of what we've got here. I'll go to the skyscraper here and give you an idea. The bridge that Stuart is talking about is here across the river, the Nile going down here. The bridge they're on is there. And earlier in the day, the pro-Mubarak supporters gathered along the Corniche there, either side of the bridge, and then pushed up Al Tahrir in towards the square, the Liberation Square. And it was there that most of the problems have happened, most of the clashes have happened, with the various groups of supporters clashing either side of the square, and also going into some of the side streets here and clashing all around there. Dr. Wafik Moustafa is with me. You know the city very well. There's not only the big open areas there, and I think some building yards where they were able to pick up stones and rocks to throw, but a maze of side streets where the action seemed to be going on today.
Because that is Cairo, late 19th century or mid 19th century, which was built by Khedive Ismail, the grandfather of King Farouk. And you will see the beam busts on the embankment of the Nile, and they appeared suddenly. So they must have used dozens and dozens of buses and coaches, or buses, but being bussed in, or lorries, or whatever it is. So they very organized the Mubarak or pro-Mubarak camp. And I think they have got the blessing of the government. I'm almost certain the Ministry of Interior and the Prime Minister of Egypt, who have never heard his voice yet, we don't know what he sounds like, they are aware of what's taking place, and they could have intercepted them because they did not come walking, and this camel and the horses business is ties up with the same story.
Some of our correspondents said they found it hard to believe it was just rent-a-mob, if you like, put out by the government. That there is a genuine split in the voice of the people in Cairo. There are definitely some that, while they may not particularly want Mubarak, they believe that perhaps his promise last night to stay on for a few months to tide them over might not be a bad idea. There clearly is a difference of opinion, although not perhaps not everybody would express it in the violent actions we've seen from a few today.
I suppose as the people who've been pacified with the speech last night, I don't think they will turn into violence. They probably will walk away and say that's enough for us. But this is a hard core of mob, which I think looks like conscripts who can be easily led. I mean, you have to realize that sometimes the policemen and police officers, they can crack someone's head with no hesitation. So I don't think it's a big thing to throw stones, particularly these buildings, which are quite old and badly maintained. It's easy to pick. And same time, they were really organized with bags to carry stones, which did not happen before. That's what's.
So it's not spontaneous, you're suggesting. It looked like a planned pro-Mubarak demonstration.
And bearing in mind the Corniche doesn't have trees, very few trees for security precautions, all the trees being removed over the years to avoid people hanging on the trees and probably kill someone.
How do you see it progressing from here? It has descended into a pretty bad state of violence tonight, where the clashes, as our correspondents are saying, are continuing. It seems hard to know where it's going to end, doesn't it?
It is bordering into anarchy, actually. It's really confused, and I think it was expected and perhaps planned, because I would like to see...
Planned anarchy?
I would say so, because why there is a government now in Egypt, irrespective of liked or not liked. There is a Minister of Interior, there is a Prime Minister, and there is a new Vice President. We'll say the old man is very ill.
And a huge standing army.
Yeah, but he did not appear in front of the media and say and answer questions. And they all hiding away and letting the young boys or the little brothers to do their job. And I think they should appear in front of the media and face the cameras and say what they're doing. What they're in the jobs for if they do not speak out.
Do you, I mean, is there any solution, do you sense, to this apart from the resignation of Mubarak? He says he'll stay on until September and then go. That is clearly not a solution, judging by what we've seen today.
Well, this mob, or this confusion is engineered to give him a reason to stay and not to give power fairly within a week or a few days, as would have expected, and as well pushing the United States to start threatening him, or the West, and then say that's the imperialism coming back again to Egypt. It's a very complicated Big Brother type of conspiracy, really.
Dr. Wafik Moustafa, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. So let's just remind you what we are seeing tonight is the heart of the capital city of 85 million people, Egypt. There is Liberation Square, Tahrir Square, around which we've seen violent clashes throughout the day as demonstrators both for and against President Mubarak have fought running battles in the streets. Down there, the lights along the Corniche overlooking the River Nile through the heart of the city there, where again we've seen more clashes tonight. We've heard that something like 350 people have been quite badly hurt today. One person described as a conscript has been killed, and there is no sign of the violence abating tonight as the world looks on and condemns the clashes.